it's Matt here from PilotPracticeExams.com, and this video is on TEM, or Threat and Error Management. It was identified by our candidates who've sat the RPL and PPL exams as the #1 area, and by a very significant margin, #1 area of concern, that is. So we're going to dive in and have a very quick look. It comes from the Manual of Standards, volume 3, and if you look at the unit requirements there's about 10 bullet points which I'm going to cover in this in this video. And the resource you need to go to is the CASA resource booklet number 8, Threat and Error Management, and at the end of this video I'll show you the link for that and where and how to find it. So let's dive in and take a quick look. I'm not going to read you every slide. I'm going to try and explain each point. I do need to do a bit of reading though, just to refresh my memory. But so each one of these, I've got the bullet point, which is this one, and then I have the explanation from that resource, which I'm going to show you, that booklet number 8, and then I've modified them slightly in some cases. So the first thing they want you to do is describe what basically TEM is. And what TEM really is, in a few words, is this: errors and threats are going to occur. That's clear. The aim, which is down here, is that we detect those errors and we respond to them before it causes a safety issue. So, for example, we put in the wrong flap setting. That's fine. It can happen. We prefer it not to, but we need to detect that and respond to it before it causes us to perhaps go under speed, or if the throttle is applied in the wrong direction, or if a gauge or a dial is read incorrectly. We want to detect that error or that threat and respond before the aircraft becomes a safety issue. And that's basically what it is in a nutshell. You can have a read of that in your own time. Just come back and pause this video. The second thing they want you to do is explain the principles of TEM. Now, the principle is what I've just told you, that errors and threats can and will occur. There's a lot we can do, which we'll go into in a moment, countermeasures and things like that, to prevent them, but they will occur, and what we really want to do is detect them, identify them, and respond to them before they become a safety thing. And we can do that through good training, briefings, checklists, standard operating procedures, human factors principles such as not flying when you're tired or agitated or had a big night out. And then there's other things that come into play depending on whether it's single pilot or multi-crew operations. So you really need to know what threat and error management is, that it's recognizing and managing errors, it's recognizing and managing threats, and it's recognizing and managing undesired aircraft states. And then when we do recognize these things, we constantly need to make this decision. Do I go? Do I not go? Do I continue or not continue, or do I divert? And to break that down, once you're flying, you don't have much of a choice not to continue. So the question then would become, do I continue, divert, or turn back? And so you're constantly going to make these decisions. So of a morning before you fly, you get a bad weather forecast, you decide not to go or not to go. And generally it's going to be not to go. In flight, you get a weather update and it's bad. So you decide that you will turn back or divert or continue. If it's, you might continue on and have a look if it's just a little bit of a concern. Or you might decide, I need to redo a fuel calculation and make sure I have enough fuel to hold, because it's predicted to be just a short-term interruption in the weather, for example, a inter or tempo. The next bullet point is they want you to be able to define a threat and give an example of a threat. So a threat is a situation that has a potential to negatively affect flight safety. And the second aspect of it is, or that it can promote an opportunity for a pilot error. So, for example, a passenger in a 2-seat aircraft that won't shut up, that just keeps talking way too much, they are actually a threat. A fellow pilot who is continually questioning everything you do and chatting about what's going on in the plane, they could be a threat because they might cause your workload and your situational awareness to be not as they should. So then they list a bunch of external and internal threats here, and they actually have more. There's a couple more tables in that document, which again I'll give you at the end. And what they say is threats increase the likelihood of errors. So threats lead to errors. Errors don't lead to threats. Errors can lead to additional threats, but threats lead to errors. The next one is they want you to give an example of a committed error. Now, committed just means that it has already happened. Okay, so they want to give examples of committed errors, so things like people putting in the wrong flap settings, people applying, pulling the throttle the wrong way or pushing the throttle, the wrong way, trim settings, people who perhaps read a gauge and they read it incorrectly, they did a calculation, they did it incorrectly, things like that. And they want to know, can you identify, so they might give you an error, and then they ask you which is the appropriate corrective action for this error. Okay, and you need to be able to pick those out. The next one is they want you to explain how the use of checklists and standard operating procedures can prevent errors. Now, this is a huge one. Checklists are there for a reason because they work and they stop us missing items. They stop us incorrectly configuring it because there are basically set minimums that we need to do to fly that aircraft. And that's been decided by someone way smarter with way more knowledge of that aircraft than we will ever have. So the manufacturer and their test pilots have flown that aircraft many, many, many times when they've come up with that checklist. And that is what we follow. And we follow it because that is the set procedure to make that aircraft safe to fly. And they don't want us making a personal decision. Now, standard operating procedures are things that aren't necessarily checklists. So, for example, when you're doing your flight training, your instructor will have shown you how to pre-flight check an aircraft. And it may not have involved a checklist, but they said, I want you to start here. I want you to look at this. I want you to look at that. And I want you to walk around. I want you to feel this. And I want you to work your way around the aircraft, checking this, and this as you go. And you go all the way around the aircraft logically and sequentially, and you don't stop until you get here, and you don't talk to someone while you do it. That is a standard operating procedure. Now, some standard operating procedures are in writing. Some of them you've been shown through training. Some of them are procedures that you will follow, but they are standard and they're the same every time. And those, the same as checklists, they help us to do things properly. Okay, so they want you to explain how they can prevent errors. So an example of a checklist preventing an error is if we follow it logically and sequentially and we use our thumb to follow it, it will make sure that we do every step. And if we also have a standard operating procedure that when we miss an item in a checklist, we go back to the top of that section, then that will make sure that we don't produce errors. The next one is they want to give examples of undesired aircraft states, how they can develop, and from an unmanaged threat or error. So first of all, what is an undesired aircraft state? It's a pilot-induced aircraft position, such as incorrect speed, incorrect attitude, incorrect position of the aircraft. Perhaps you're lined up for the wrong runway. Perhaps you're lined up for a taxiway. Perhaps you're on the wrong runway or taxiway. That's an undesired aircraft state. So examples of mismanaged aircraft systems errors resulting in undesired aircraft states might be you forget or you turn the anti-icing onto the wrong setting or the de-icing, or you forget to turn it on. And so the aircraft starts accumulating ice and you've got an undesired aircraft state. Another one is you look at all your gauges, but you're incorrectly scanning and you miss that you have much higher than normal temperatures. And so now you've got an overheated engine and you've got a situation on your hands that's critical, and you've got an undesired aircraft state. Let's go to number 4. Okay, the next one is explain what resources a pilot could identify and use to avoid or manage an undesired aircraft state. Now, the two examples they use here in the syllabus is such as being lost or entering adverse weather. So these are called countermeasures. They didn't mention it in the syllabus point, but we call them countermeasures. And they're designed to stop threats and errors occurring. So for being lost, there's a whole bunch for both of these that you can use. It starts with way back in your training, that you learn what to do to make sure you're not lost. And then when you're planning, thorough planning, identify easy position fixes, such as when you cross a highway parallel to your flight path, or when you cross a major river or creek parallel to your flight path. Maybe when you see a town, a beam, all those types of things. Making sure you pick a route that's suitable and safe, where you can get position fixes. So, for example, when you're flying in the outback, often we'll fly past towns or roads, even though it's not the most direct route, because we need to find a spot where we can get a position fix. And then the other thing is making sure you do those regular position fixes and that you record times when you were there. So let's look at entering adverse weather. How can that be avoided or managed? So there's a whole bunch. Again, goes back to good training, goes back to right now, what you're doing, learning what are the acceptable minima, okay, getting good forecasts before you go, comparing those forecasts to the minima, monitoring and changing the weather en route, identify your critical locations, identify your critical point where you need to make decisions by, identify, for example, if you're going to need an updated forecast, identify where might be the most appropriate point in time to get that, to allow you to make a decision in time and turn back, or have multiple alternatives instead of just one. And then make good decisions en route, okay, and have appropriate attitudes. Having I need to get there because I wanted to go there. Well, that should have come up way back in the planning phase, and you should have decided that if you really need to get there, you're going to leave days earlier, or you're going to drive instead, or you're going to catch a commercial flight rather than try and take a VFR flight. So the next one is explain the importance of ensuring that tasks are prioritised. So what they're after here is during all flights, not just when there's an undesired aircraft state, but all flights, we must prioritise aviating, navigating, and then communicating. Always aviating, always flying. We're always prioritising safe flight of the plane as the number one priority. So you want to plan ahead. You want to anticipate things that are coming up. And during an undesired aircraft state, so this is the bit that relates to the question, you want to always try and get you want to fly the plane and get it back to the state, into a desired state. So if you're too slow, then the critical thing would be to correct the speed. If your nose is too high, then the critical thing would be to lower the nose. If you're banked too steep, then the critical thing would be to bank less. So it would be to fly the plane. It would never be to navigate or to read or to respond to someone on the radio. It would always be to immediately correct that undesired state. And the last one is they want you to give examples of how establishing and maintaining interpersonal relationships can promote safe flight. So there's a few things you can do here. Sorry, I've got to be able to scroll down. Having trouble because of where the slides are behind a little camera thing here. Okay, so there's a few things you can do here. You want to conflict for example, conflict between you and ATC, or between you and another pilot, or between you and someone on board. Maintaining effective communication there would be very important, because it would stop a situation being inflamed. Also, communicate efficiently and effectively. So rambling on the radio as opposed to using standard phraseology is very important, so that other people understand you and there's no miscommunication. Effectively communicating with ATC so that they understand where you are and you are complying with their requirements. Also, so if we move on to the next, define and explain the objectives to applicable involved parties. So, for example, you might want your co-pilot, or you might want someone you're flying with, or you might want another aircraft, and you need to explain effectively and what you need them to do. So, for example, you might be second in queue and someone's in the circuit and someone's trying to come across midfield crosswind and join in front of you. You need to make sure that the objectives of that communication are applicable and that you can get those across properly. And because your safe flight is going to be dependent on that. Demonstrate a level of assertiveness. Now, this is very much to do with multi-crew, but it can be to do with single pilot operations as well. So, for example, let's say ATC gives you an incorrect instruction, and because they got distracted or they just read it wrong or they weren't concentrating, you wouldn't just comply. You would use assertiveness and question that instruction. Like, as an example, let's say ATC told you to cruise at an incorrect hemispherical level. Well, let's say ATC just gave you an instruction and at your aircraft, but clearly it was wrong because the position or altitude or instruction they gave you just seemed wrong for your aircraft. That would be where you would use your assertiveness and you would question that instruction. And you would say, go ahead, give your call sign and ask them to restate their instructions or to cross-check their instructions. And you'd use assertiveness to do that. And the last one is encouraging passengers or co-pilots or whatever to participate and contribute in safe flight. So, for example, let's say you are, you're in a high traffic situation and you're trying to keep an eye on an aircraft in front of you and monitor your gauges and prepare for landing or whatever, going to a fly-in, you might ask your passenger, and I regularly do this, to spot other aircraft. And so you hear a radio call, and rather than you taking your eyes off what's in front of you, you know there's one out to your left, and you ask, or out to your right, and you ask your passenger, say, hey, I'd like you to look for that aircraft. They should be directly off our wingtip to the right, and they should be around about our level, maybe just below or just above us, our height. Can you scan that area and tell me when you find that aircraft and point at it, please? So another one might be you're trying to look for traffic, but you're also trying to find a aerodrome that's down off your right hand side. You might ask your passenger to help look for that. So using those interpersonal communication skills can lower your workload, can increase your situational awareness. So that's all of the bullet points that they want you to cover for PPL. RPL will need to cover some of those, but not all of them. I can't tell you exactly which ones, but you will want to cover, if I was RPL, I'd be covering all of them, but just expecting less questions because you're doing a 3-hour exam instead of a 2. So here is the reference. That's the URL that you want to use. What you're going to do is, the easiest way to find it is to Google search CASA Resource Booklet 8 Threat and Error Management .pdf. This is the link you'll see down here. And you need to be careful. There are 2 versions. There's one version that was put out in 2009, and it's not going to look like that. And the version 2 put out, I think, in 2019 looks like that. So this link is going to take you to this CASA site. You're going to click on this link here, and it's going to give you this PDF booklet, which I think is about 26 pages or so. Or you can just go back through this slide and pause it and read and make notes and say things out loud. But good luck. That's threat and error management. That's basically what you really need to know for your exams. And just be aware, you really need to cover this topic very, very well, because it was identified by our previous candidates as being a very difficult topic. And if you want more information, head on over to PilotPracticeExams.com, join our Facebook group, and thanks for watching.